I'm Travis Flohr. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture, and my area of emphasis is biodiversity and designing climate resilient communities, particularly focusing on hazards, kind of the design and planning of hazard resilient communities, both social, human centric, but also environmental. I My take on geodesign is that it's not new, and I think a lot of people's take when you look through the writings, the literature, the promotional materials as well, it's not necessarily a new thing. I would say it's for me, it's a bit of a rebranding of the legacy of ecological design and planning. All the way from was it Sir Patrick Geddes and his sort of paper overlay methods, Ian McHarg and others in our field. And I realize they're white male centric, but that's not to say there aren't others out there. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. Um, but it's leveraging technology to understand and engage people in the design process, but really to understand those system and intra-system interactions and how you kind of move forward with all that information to design in a sort of balanced way. Hopefully achieving some of your impacts. And to me, that's really the emerging thing that's increasingly more imperative is what is the quantitative and qualitative impacts of what we do. And that's kind of my interest in it. So you'll hear my bias towards that because what led me to the career path I've taken is as an undergrad, I was guilty of this, and my undergrads still are. We throw around terms like sustainability, walkability, or this is better, this is worse. And we never really quantified or qualified that per se. I love working with other disciplines like geographers and planners, and I work with foresters, anthropologists, ecologists, but to some degree, it's sometimes it's not the right scale. And so geography does a lot of amazing work in the same arenas, but it's at like state or multi-state realms, and it's difficult to translate to a parcel or a new development scale. And so trying to leverage and bring those sort of down to the scales at which we work, and so hopefully they can make it a bit more approachable for most humans and that those benefits then scale back up. So broadly, my research really focuses on that because I have an urban and regional planning PhD kind of tied with my landscape architecture degrees. I'm really interested in how policy is kind of created and written, and what its intents are, but then actually following that through how it was designed, how it's being used, maintained, managed. Because you often find the best intended policies, there's loopholes and they have unintended consequences. And so I'm often sort of seeking those out to help kind of feed back through the whole cycle of, if we can get some better policy. And a lot of that is a co-developed and learning sort of environment, so collaborative amongst the broad community of people. Uh, and so I'm kind of interested in that because so biodiversity collapse to me is a big issue, and how we support climate resilient communities. It's also putting them in sort of allowing them to be built in the wrong places, but also using sort of the wrong management and the wrong kind of construction processes often elevates their risk, and we don't intend it to do so. So that's kind of the broad sort of realms that I delve into, and so it's how they all interact. And where are the leverage points that we can shift the future to be safer, more equitable, while enhancing and repairing the biodiversity that collapse that we're causing. So that takes on a lot of different forms. I think it's very closely tied to the curriculum, mostly because we, as I mentioned, like we're very interested in putting well-rounded students into practice, which makes us be really tied to practice because we don't want students to work on sort of theoretical projects that don't solve problems for people. And so I think it's very much tied hand in hand, and so it's a difficult thing that I think myself, faculty, students, but even just individual practitioners and firms sort of wrestle with all the time. Is how do you take your ethos into a world that doesn't really share that at times, and so that becomes really challenging and difficult. I think increasingly. I am encouraged that our profession's taking more of a stance on issues, both socially and politically and environmentally. I hope they continue that. I hope it doesn't lose momentum, and I would encourage us to push it even further. Um, so I would encourage students in particular to cast a wider net of what our profession is and where we fit in. Because I think, you know, while most of our students go to traditional design firms or government or nonprofit, but they're still doing design, sort of land development, site design sorts of work. Um, I think the skills and the world views that we have could also fit politics or other sorts of policy fields, think tanks, because I think we have something to contribute that could be beneficial, and you could actually start shifting that supposed amorphous, uncontrollable market. So even if it's just more landscape architects becoming their own developers, I think would be also interesting. Yeah, if you're interested in land development, go to the business school. We have a good one. If you're interested in ecology, we have a lot of different programs here that offer ecology centric courses. If you're interested in geodesign or GIS, we have one of the best GIS programs in the country, if not the world. Um, and so I encourage students to do that because it helps fill out that well-roundedness, and I know that's something the profession really wants. So I've talked to a number of dependents. So for the MLA students, I know they have a pretty tight curriculum, but I would seek out those opportunities as much as they can and leverage them. Um, and that can also just be through clubs and activities and other things. For them, I think identifying sort of programs or specialties as quickly as they can. So reading is sort of the best way that I do that, is just read as much as you can, as wide as you can, um, as and also as fast as you can. But I think doing things like this, talking to as many faculty as you can fit in, also just maybe something clicks or they say something that really resonates with what you want to do or what your passion is, and then trying to get involved in their research or in teaching sorts of courses that allow you to explore that further is also really good. Through a TA or RA, and I think that's really helpful. Um, it's a tricky balance. Also, need to balance life, so I encourage people to take breaks as much as they can, and seek out faculty that support that. And even if you are working with people that just aren't working out, they may be great people, they may be good advisors and mentors, but it's just not working. Don't be afraid to change. And the sooner you change and just open communication, the better it is, for everybody. Have One project, I'm really excited. It's just starting. I am working with Harper's Ferry Historical Park. They have some cliff resources there, so I have a passion for rock climbing and things. But we're going to evaluate how different modes of recreation have impacted rare and endangered plant communities on those cliff faces, and so we're looking about at how human recreation may or may not be overusing a certain resource to the detriment of biodiversity there. And so I'm excited for that. That's just starting slowly, but it surely. I'm a bit of a nerd with technology, so that's the spatial GIS stuff, and so I look at a lot of technology and tools, and it's like, oh well, how might we better leverage that? Or there are things that we keep doing constantly. Often I see my students keep doing constantly manually, and it's excruciating, it's painful. It's like, well, we should be leveraging digital tools for that. So one is, so colleagues and I, Professor Wu Hong and a PhD student, Nastaran, created this pollinator app. And it's a bit of a web app. We built it into a statistic program. It's just sort of a pilot beta test. But how can we leverage plant databases to understand plant support of pollinator biodiversity, as well as plants' ability to adapt or be resilient to climate change, changing hardiness zones, more extreme weather events, so like drought, fire, flooding. And so really it's just kind of comparing two sets of tables. We have our plant schedule that we're designing with, but then we also have all the plant information we can pull from plant databases and see how they match up.